What is up, homies? My name is Felix and I'm here back again with another video for you all today. And today I'm going to be teaching you guys the basics of sound design. So I'm sure there's a million sound design tutorials out there from people who know way more than me, but I've learned quite a bit over the past few months or so practicing making sounds and stuff. So I'm going to teach you everything that I know, and hopefully by the end of this video you should be able to make pretty much any sound that you can think of. So yeah, make sure you guys check out my Instagram and my SoundCloud down in the description below, along with the playlist of songs I produced, my Beatstore, Discord, all that stuff. Go check it out if you'd like to do so. And now we can start making some sounds. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using Serum just because that's the synth that I'm comfortable with. But for you, you can use pretty much any synth that you want. You can use Vital or Helm or whatever you use, even Citrus inside of FL Studio. It's a stock plugin. That'll work just fine as well. Basically, the way that any synth works is you'll have just a plain waveform, and then you take that plain basic waveform and you adjust how the volume works, you adjust the filter on it, and you can add modulations and stuff like that. But that's the essence of how a synth actually works. And pretty much any synth that you use is going to have this main initialized preset, which sounds like this. But how do we take this and get it to sound like something that's actually a musical sound? And for that right there, we're going to need the ADSR controls. So ADSR means attack, decay, sustain, and release. And this is how we're going to adjust the volume of our sound over time. So the attack is how long it takes your sound to go from 0 volume to full volume. So if you have a short attack, it's going to go really quick to full volume. If you have a longer attack, the volume is going to be rising for a longer amount of time to that full volume point. So a short attack, the sound activates right away. However, if we push this attack like this, the sound of our sound here is kind of going to swell upwards. As you can hear there, it started out quiet and got louder. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the S, which is sustain. So the sustain is basically where the volume goes back down to after reaching its maximum volume after the attack. So let's say we set our sustain at negative 10 decibels around here. Now when we play the sound, it's going to swell up a little bit and it's going to go back down to where our sustain level is. And now with the decay function, that's basically how long it takes for you to get back to that sustain point. So as you can see, when we adjust the decay, it's basically changing how long it takes us to get to that sustained point. And now with release, that's basically how long it takes your sound to get back down to 0 after you take your finger off the key. So right now we have it like this. Take my finger off and it instantly stops. But if we add a little bit of release, it still kind of keeps going a little bit after I took my finger off. Also, you might see a feature that says hold. That's basically the time from when the attack goes up to the full volume, how long it takes to reach the point where it starts going down to the sustain point. Definitely one thing to keep in mind here is that with the sustain feature, it will keep sustaining at that volume for as long as you put your finger on the key. Once you take your finger off the key, then it'll start going down into the release. So that means if you want a sound that's very plucky and doesn't play the whole time while you're holding down on the keys, what you'd want to do is bring the sustain down like this. So now, it'll go down to a point where the volume is 0, even if your finger is still on the key. So that's the basics of ADSR. Those are super, super important. One of like the most important things when you're doing sound design. But now we gotta talk a little bit about waveforms. So there's a couple different very basic waveforms that I'm gonna go over here. There's also tons of other waveforms and stuff that looks like this. But we're just gonna stick to the basics here. So this one right here, very smooth curve. This is a sine wave. As you can hear, it's a very smooth sounding waveform. It's not super abrasive to your ears and stuff. So this is really good if you want to do a lot softer sounds and not have super like harsh in your face stuff. The next one here is a triangle wave. As you can tell, it's shaped like a triangle. In my opinion, sine waves and triangle waves are pretty similar, but a triangle wave is like a little bit more harsh. It's still kind of a softer sound, but just has a little bit more edge to it, I think. The next one here, shaped like a square, so naturally, it's a square wave. To me, I feel like square waves are a lot harsher, but also a lot thicker waveforms. And then this bad boy right here is a sawtooth wave. You can't really tell because it looks just like a line right here, but it's basically going like this. Very sharp up, down, and then very sharp up again. As you can hear with this one, it's nowhere near as soft and pleasing to the ear as a sine wave or even a triangle wave. So yeah, these are like the basic waveforms that you have to know, and honestly, what I said about them is just my opinion. You might really think that the sound of a sawtooth wave is very pleasing to your ears. It's kind of all just subjective. However, you do have to kind of know how each one of these sounds. So another thing to cover really quickly is the filter. Most synths will have some sort of filter within them. The filter is basically just an EQ. If you don't know about EQs and other, effects plugins and stuff, there's a video I did right here, or wait. right here, where you can learn all about different effects plugins and whatnot. Basically, an EQ/filter allows you to adjust the specific frequencies within your sound. So if there's a lot of high end, like for example with the Sawtooth Wave, we can turn on a filter and cut some of that really harsh high end sound out. And vice versa, if we have a bass sound, we can cut out some of the low end so that we just have high end. And now the final essential component that you need to know with sound design is modulation. So basically modulation is just taking certain parameters and just messing with them and wiggling them around, but except for you don't have to do it manually. Some algorithm machine thing does it for you. So we can do that with LFOs. LFO means low frequency oscillator, but you can just use them to adjust different parameters inside of Serum, but you can do it with pretty much any other synth out there as well. Inside of Serum, the way that you do it is you just click this and you drag it onto whatever parameter that you want to modulate. So we're gonna do it with the cutoff filter. LFOs and modulation can be kind of confusing, but with an LFO, it's just gonna take whatever parameter that you linked it to, so the cutoff here, for example, and it's going to adjust it according to however you have the LFO shape set. So here what it's basically saying is it's gonna have it all the way down, and it's gonna go all the way to the top, and then all the way down. And you can see that happening as it goes through here. It's just going through that cycle of from the bottom to the top to the bottom. The LFO is literally taking that knob and going. But let's say that the cutoff that we just adjusted, we don't want it to go all the way from one side to the other side. We just want it to be, moving back and forth a little bit. The way that we do that, you can see this little blue circle-y kind of thing here. We just click and drag this down, and now we have only a certain part where that LFO is gonna move back and forth. As you can see, it's not moving back and forth as much, it's just moving within that little section. So if that's maybe a little too fast for you, you want it to modulate slower, you can go in here and change the rate to bring it down to 1 bar. With an LFO, it'll just run through the shape of the LFO that you have set here, forever, pretty much. But now what if you don't want it to just go back and forth the whole time? Let's say you just want the filter to do one sweep and then stop. So if you just want something to happen once, you can do it with an envelope. And an envelope is the exact same thing as the ADSR thing that I showed you in the beginning. But now instead of those controls applying to the waveform, they're applying to the filter that we have it set to, or whatever other thing that you might want to set your modulation to. So right here, we can right click and then just do remove all modulators. And now we can take envelope 2, click and drag it to the cutoff here again. And right now it's not going to do anything because we just have this basic, rectangle shaped envelope here. However, if we're to take the attack a little bit like this, we kind of get the filter opening up a little bit there in the beginning. And then remember what I said in the beginning about the sustain. If you hold your finger down on the key, it'll keep playing. You might want that with your filter here, you also might not. But let's say I want this filter to open up just for a little bit and then close right back again. The way that we do that is the same way that we would adjust the volume of the waveform. We just bring the sustain down, and now it goes back down. So that is pretty much how modulation works, and depending on the synth that you have, you can modulate pretty much anything. I can take this LFO here and I can modulate the fine pitch. We can also just use this to modulate the volume of the waveform as well. And you get the idea, you can pretty much modulate anything that you want to. So now that we know the sound design basics, you might be like, well, okay, this is great, but I can't use any of this to actually make sounds that I want yet. So I'm just gonna give you guys a couple little formulas, I guess you could call them, on how to make certain types of sounds, and then from there, you can mess with them and, change them and do whatever you want with them. So the first one we're gonna make is a pad sound. Pad sound is really, really easy in my opinion. So the first thing, you usually want to start off with a waveform. So I'm going to pick a square wave actually. I'm going to go to analog and basic shapes and then find the square wave. And with pad sounds, we want them to kind of swell in. You're always going to turn the attack up quite a bit. So with this one, we're going to turn the attack up. And I also don't want the pad to end super abruptly because usually with pad sounds, they'll kind of swell out a little bit as well as swell in. So remember I said the release is how we do that. So we're going to turn up the release a little bit. So there we go, we kind of have a pad sound going on. It's a little bit abrasive to the ears, but we will fix that. Now also what I'm gonna do is lower the sustain a little bit, just so that it doesn't stay at full volume the whole time. So now let's fix the fact that it sounds horrible on your eardrums by adding a filter. And we're just gonna cut out some of the high end. If you like that sound, that's fine, but I think that's a little bit too much of a cut going on. So we're gonna bring up this cutoff. And I think that right there sounds pretty good. However, there are a couple things that you can do to make it sound a little better. So with pad sounds, it usually sounds nice to turn up the unison, or in your synth, it might be called voices or something like that. I'm gonna turn it up to 4, and then I'm gonna turn this detune down. And if you have it really high, It's gonna sound like something out of a horror movie. So we're gonna bring that down a little bit. So yeah, that's pretty much the basis for how you make just a standard pad sound. You can make whatever changes you want to this. Depending on the synth you're using, you can actually add a second sound. It's probably gonna be called Oscillator 2 or Oscillator B or something like that. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the oscillators are what make the waveforms. And if we turn this one on and then add the filter to B, now we have a little bit of a different sound. And that's how you can get really crazy with making very unique sounds by combining different waveforms together and changing them in different ways and stuff like that. So now that we have a pad sound, we're gonna do the next step, which in my opinion is like keys or like a bell kind of sound. So we're gonna go back to the initialize preset. And now what you can do is pick a waveform. I'm gonna go with a sine wave this time. So with a keys or bell kind of sound, we're gonna think about how the sound actually works in real life. So like a piano, for example, we'll play the sound right away. There's no swelling in or anything like there would be with maybe like a cello or a violin or something. So that means we're not gonna have much attack on this thing. So if we wanna have kind of a standard piano-ish sound, we're gonna bring the sustain down a little bit and then bring the release off this way. And now we have a little key sound, and that was 2 steps. That right there was honestly easier than doing the pad. And if you want this to sound even softer, what I would recommend is turning the attack up just a little bit. And that is just an absolutely beautiful sound, and we made that in like 5 seconds. So personally, I think a sound like this doesn't really need a filter. However, if you want to put one on there, you totally can. It just, won't make too much of a difference. But one thing that you can do that I like to do quite a bit is actually modulate the fine pitch just a little bit, just so that it kind of wiggles around a little bit. So we can take an LFO and drag it to the fine pitch here, and then bring this knob down like a lot. And it's not super noticeable, but it just adds a little bit of lo-fi-ness to it. But now might also be a good time to talk about the effects tab inside of Serum, or you might have one inside of your synth as well, or you'll probably just have effects inside of your DAW. But what I'm gonna do with a sound like this, it's kind of more on the lo-fi side of things, is maybe open up a distortion and then put downsample on it, and then turn the mix down. So honestly, with a sound like this, that's really all you need to do. You don't really need to do a whole bunch more fancy stuff if you have a good sound already. So that covers that. Now what we're gonna do is make a little lead sound. So with a lead sound, you usually want it to be playing the whole time that you're holding down the key. It doesn't really matter what type of wave you use. I think for this one, I'm gonna go with the triangle wave. And I've actually seen some people when they make leads just not even touch the ADSR at all. But for me, I think what I'm gonna do is just add a little bit of release. It all depends on what sounds good to you, but in my opinion, a very abrupt ending doesn't really sound good for the type of lead that I'm going for here. Then also, it might sound good to turn up the unison or the voices, maybe turn it up to 3 or so, and then turn this down. But as you can hear, the way we have this sound right now, we can play chords with it, and we don't really want to do that. So your synth might have something that says mono. If you click this little mono button, you can only play 1 note at a time now. As you can hear, I was holding down 1 note and playing other notes at the same time, and it went to those other notes that I was playing instead of playing a chord. And now, if you want to get fancy with it, and this is something that I like to do with most of my lead sounds, you can turn up the portamento here. And now it's going to sound really cool because 1 note will glide into the next one, and that just is an awesome sound. That is just so nice. So I did use a triangle wave for this to start out, but maybe I'm thinking now, okay, I don't really like this triangle wave, so let's try something different. So let's just go with that sawtooth wave and let's put a filter on it. Boom. So this is a pretty nice lead sound so far. However, what I want to do is make it like a wow kind of sound. So in order to do that, we're going to have to automate that cutoff feature. And I'm going to click and assign this to the cutoff. And now we're basically just going to adjust the filter so that it opens up and then goes right back down. Same way that I kind of showed you earlier. So we're just going to go like this and then put this down. So with this right now, we have the right kind of envelope going on. But it's not adjusting the cutoff filter in the right area. It's just opening it up all the way. So what we want to do is bring this actual knob down. And now we got the wow sound going on. With my lead sounds, I do usually like to modulate the fine pitch like I showed you before. That can sound really cool with leads because the leads go on for a while and you can kind of start to hear that modulation. Yeah, that's how you make a basic lead sound. And now the final thing we're gonna make is just a basic bass sound. So we're back on the initialize preset here, and I'm gonna go with the square wave for this one, because like I said, square waves kind of have like a richer, fuller sound, and we're gonna bring it down to a lower pitch. So you can bring it down 2 or 1 octave, depends on what you feel like doing. I think I'm gonna bring it down to 1 and then just play it lower. Very distorted right now. However, we are gonna put a filter on it. So boom, go to the filter. Personally, what I want is more of a plucky bass sound, so this It's not exactly what we're going for. What we're gonna do is turn up the attack just a slight bit, and then we're gonna do that thing I talked about where we turn the sustain all the way down so it fades out while we still have our hand on the key. So take the sustain, boom, all the way down. So for this, I'm actually going to add a couple different layers. So I'm going to turn on this sub oscillator, which is just basically another oscillator that just has simple waveforms. And then I'm going to turn on the other actual oscillator here and then bring the pitch down again. And then again with bass sounds, what I like to do is turn up the unison / voices. And now we pretty much have a nice bass sound going on. And the last thing is, bass sounds and lead sounds are kind of similar because you want to have the mono feature on. You obviously don't want to be playing chords with a bass sound. And then also you can turn on that portamento if you want to, but that's kind of more for like sub basses rather than, you know, this plucky type of bass that we got going on. So yeah, that's pretty much how you make any melodic sound that you want. I'm not going to go too much into how to make, you know, drum sounds because that's kind of a whole other world of what I was trying to do here today. But you know, if you guys want another video on that, maybe I could do that in the future. One other thing that I wanted to show you guys is something that I personally would have liked to know early on is how to make your sounds actually velocity sensitive. You can click this velocity thing and drag it to the volume or the level of the oscillator, and then you can drag this down and then just turn it all the way up with the blue thing. So now when we go into the piano roll or wherever, however you make your beats, we can adjust the velocities, boom, like this, and now our sound will actually rise in volume. Unless you do that, your sounds are all going to be the same volume all the time, and there's not going to be really any dynamics there or anything like that. So yeah, that's my final important tip that you should know for sound design. So yeah, that is pretty much going to do it for me in this video here today. I covered pretty much all the important things that you need to know for sound design. Obviously, I'm sure there's a couple little things here and there that I missed, but for the most part, now you know how to, you know, work around your synthesizer, how to make a few basic sounds, and how to actually make your own sounds based off of those sounds. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video here today. Make sure you guys check out my Instagram, my SoundCloud, down in the description below, along with the playlist of songs I produce, BeatStore, Discord, all that stuff. Go check it out if you would like to do so, and I will see you guys next time.
Turn me up, let's go. Damn, I feel like the man now, yeah. I cannot turn bands down, yeah. Chopper make them stand down, yeah.